Just Energy with naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theories that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swing of a pendulum to the waves in the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. In the same way, things such as rocks and minerals vibrate very slowly and at speeds that are imperceptible to us. Living things such as plants, animals, and man vibrate faster and appear to be alive. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is if we take everything in our own universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita as she explores questions such as, what are we made of? Why do we get sick? How can I live a more balanced and whole life? Call in and talk to her and her thought-provoking guests. Send us your questions and get the help you need to move beyond any obstacles or challenges that may be affecting your life, right from the source. So stay tuned and explore your possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you too can learn to be a medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine and practitioner. To keep informed of our upcoming show schedule, please visit www.justenergyradio.com and sign up for our newsletter. And also on the Just Energy Radio website, you can access 4 years' worth of excellent programming like what you're going to hear today. So do check out that website. Today we have a very interesting mix of guests. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Steven Greer about contact with interstellar civilizations. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Carl von Essen about nature as a spiritual guide. Not very related, but sounds very interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about Steven, Dr. Steven Greer, and we will get him on the air. Dr. Steven Greer is the founder and director of the Disclosure Project, a lifetime member of Alpha Omega Alpha, the nation's most prestigious medical honor society. Dr. Greer is an emergency physician and former member of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Caldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. In addition to heading the Disclosure Project, he has also been supervising a worldwide search for alternative energy sources, specifically those known as zero-point or over-unity devices, with the plan to identify and develop systems which will eliminate the need for fossil fuels. His website is disclosureproject.org. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Dr. Steven Greer. Hi, Steven. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. I have to start here. You are an emergency physician. How does an emergency physician transition into being a UFO guy?
Well, you know, I really am not interested in UFOs. UFOs are unidentified flying objects is what that acronym stands for. And that was a term that was concocted by the intelligence community in the 60s after they knew that they were not unidentified and didn't fly. So we speak of two things, extraterrestrial vehicles, which are from other star systems, which we can prove exist, and the other equally important area, which are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are man-made anti-gravity devices that the Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and other large aerospace companies have been working on since the 40s and 50s. And those are the ones that many people see when they're out in the desert in Utah and California. So my interest in this comes from the fact that, number one, I had a sighting of one of these objects when I was about 8 years old. And number two, at around that same time, my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, was the senior project engineer that built the lunar module, which a lot of people don't remember what that was, but it was that funny-looking thing that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong in it. That was my uncle's project at Grumman, which became Northrop Grumman. So I've known of this area since I was literally eight or 9 years of age. And it's so totally not what the public has the image of this. I mean, the caricatures of the subject that appear in movies and videos and in the UFO subculture are almost diametrically opposed to the truth of what's going on. And what I began to realize as time went forward was that there was no organized effort globally to make peaceful diplomatic contact with these interstellar visitors, number one, and number two, that the secrecy was being maintained for a number of reasons, but chief among them was the fact that the energy and propulsion systems behind these devices would completely enable us to heal the Earth, Gaia, without which we have no future. And so when I realized that the technologies that had been studied and developed in my uncle's company and other companies had been fully developed by the late 50s to early 60s, I was frankly outraged, and I began to look into this and formed disclosureproject.org, which you can go to the website and see. And eventually we identified hundreds of top-secret military and intelligence and corporate whistleblowers or witnesses to these classified operations and then moved them out to the public. So one of the projects is to make peaceful contact, and we have a diplomatic team working on that. The other is to inform the public and our policymakers of what's going on in these classified projects and why the secrecy exists and how that secrecy is literally strangling the Earth and the health of the Earth out and the life of the Earth in such a way that it's a threat. It's an existential threat at this point in our history, and that we feel that it's very important that this be taken seriously and that the caricatures of the subject, be put aside and it be looked at very seriously by scientists and policymakers and philosophers and people who are concerned about our future.
I think that's an excellent goal. And I think for, this show and the importance of where we're going in the show, that we're just going to start with the blanket statement that we have been visited by extraterrestrials, because I think it's going to make everything else we discuss, have some context, so we don't need to talk about contact or anything like that. We're just going to make the assumption we've been visited.
Well, and the thing is that it's 70% of the public now think that. It's interesting, when we started this project, only about a third did. And Disclosure Project, we did a big National Press Club event about 10 years ago, and that was seen by nearly 1 billion people around the world. And since then, the French government, the British government, the Danish government, New Zealand, other countries around the world, Chile, Mexico, have been releasing their files and video footage and images of these objects. So it's really a minority position now that we're not alone in the universe. I think that the big question becomes, however, what's really going on in these classified projects, and how do we fix this dysfunction in our society that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about when he said, beware of the military-industrial complex, that it would become a threat to our democracy and our way of life. And I couldn't help but be struck by your introductory, the little spiel at the beginning of your show about energy, because it was talking about how everything is energy and that even thought is. And in fact, this gets directly into the question of what we're dealing with in terms of an entirely new paradigm in science, and the science of consciousness, but also the science of what are called transdimensional electronic systems that create more energy than you have to put into them, because they're pulling energy out of what's called the zero-point energy field, which is the baseline energy field that all subatomic particles and matter is fluxing in and out of in the cosmos. And that once this area of science begins to be looked at, it means that we can get ourselves off of oil and gas and coal and nuclear power. And this is not a pipe dream or a conspiracy theory. This can be proven. And so one of the things that I think people have to understand is that this issue is very critically important, not just for the fact that the relationship between humans and these visitors has been militarized and abused and neglected, which we have to correct, which is what the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is CSETI.org, is doing. We're training people to become interstellar sort of citizen diplomats. But I think the other issue is the question of what kind of future do we have so long as these very powerful interests, special interests they're called in Washington, that really abuse power to maintain this kind of secrecy. If they continue to have their way, what we're going to have is a world where we're fighting over the last barrel of oil coming out of the Middle East or something. And I think that the biosphere simply cannot withstand another 50 or 60 years of this kind of secrecy. So we realize that these issues are all tied up around this subject, which is one of the reasons why, I have some CIA documents from the early 50s where the agency is talking about engaging Disney Studios to make cartoons and silly movies about the subject so the issue would be marginalized and ridiculed. And I have this in a CIA document from 1953, before I was born. So I think that people have to understand that the disinformation on this subject is what the dominant information is, unfortunately, and the real information, which is what we've been trying to put together and put out to the public, really is critical, not only in terms of the human future, but how we're going to be able to go into space, whether we're going to have a biosphere to live in. If we continue living like we are now, we're not. And I think that this gets to another large question is, what kind of sciences are there that are being held back in terms of very advanced electromagnetic systems that would have, I'm speaking as a physician now, a doctor, have healing effects? And those have also been kept secret and suppressed. So I think that we have to look at this in a very broad way and see at the core of it are folks who are trying to maintain the status quo because, let's face it, there's about $600 trillion in fossil fuel assets that about 200 or 300 individuals and companies control. Now, a lot of people don't realize that there are 200 or 300 families and corporations that have over half of the net worth of the entire planet of the 7 billion people that live here. And this is, of course, also a dysfunctional situation and relationship that we're now seeing, the outcome in the Middle East with all these revolutions. But globally, we're in a situation like that. So looking at the health of humanity and the health of the biosphere and of Gaia, but also literally human physical health and healing, these are all very, very relevant subjects, and they have to do with the sciences that I call generally transdimensional sciences that deal with very advanced energy programs and electromagnetic systems that can have not only healing effect, but energy generation and propulsion applications that would enable us to have a planet with sustainability and abundance and a complete transformation in the macroeconomic order of the planet.
It seems to me that people are becoming much more, I'm going to say, aware, or they're questioning more what's really going on as
right.
far as the role that government is playing and how much the government is withholding. And I have this feeling that all you need is one thing that they're withholding to come, up front to the surface, undeniable. As an example, a little off point, there was a conspiracy to kill JFK, and look, here's the documents, and look, it's right out there, and the government knew. I just feel like all of the secrets and lies will just kind of come tumbling down like a stack of cards.
But in a way they have, and this is the point I'm making. DisclosureProject.org has literally reached 1 billion people around the world. And what you find in Washington, however, is that the public have this very kind of inflated sense of the people who we elect to office having control over that system. And in reality, there's at least two governments. There's the government that we elect and that they then appoint. And then there's this sort of permanent, very secret government. And, don't take my word for it. Senator Inouye, who's a very respected senator from Hawaii, said, and I'm quoting, that there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. That's what I'm talking about. And those are the folks. So, back when during the Clinton era, I was the guy who put together the briefing for President Clinton on this subject and personally spent 3 hours with his first CIA director, R. James Woolsey, because both the CIA director and the president had been denied access to operational access and control on the projects dealing with so-called UFOs. And they were horrified that that was the case. In fact, towards the end of this meeting, the CIA director was virtually in tears. And my wife and I went to this meeting, rather skeptically. I really thought he was just picking my brain and wanted to know what I had because he was a spy, the chief spy, and the spy in chief of the CIA. And in reality, the man, honestly, was the emperor that had no clothes. I mean, he absolutely was completely exposed, had no access to these projects. And I was mortified that that could be the case, that there had been this kind of subversion of the constitutional chain of command. And subsequent to that, I began to do briefings for people like the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the largest intelligence entity in the Pentagon, that's almost as large as the CIA, and other senior military officials, and they also were not aware. They were aware of these issues. They didn't have control or access to these highly compartmented and compartmentalized above top secret projects. And most people don't realize that just because you're the president or just because you're on the Senate Intelligence Committee, it doesn't mean that you have access to these things. This is exactly what Eisenhower warned us about. But the reason the secrecy is so extraordinary on this particular subject, and also the ridicule and disinformation is so virulent, is because they really don't want people to know the fact that we don't need to be putting oil in gasoline in the tanks of our cars. We really don't need to be paying a utility bill, and that the technologies to liberate the planet from this macroeconomic slavery are already extant. It's not like we have to invent them. They're here already. And so this is an enormous message of hope, but it also is a message that means that people have to be aware of this and organize to change the status quo.
But, I mean, that has been going on for years. You know, when you talk about Tesla, when you talk about in health, like Rife and the Rife machine, you know, killing cancer in bodies. It's kind of like, okay, you know, we can do this and it's not going to cost any money. It's like, bye-bye, you got to go away, because we can get a lot more money if we do these surgeries and give you pharmaceuticals.
Well, and the other problem is that a lot of people say, oh, well, these are conspiracy theories. I said, no, they're not theories. They're just conspiracies. And people do conspire to get advantage over other people economically and the power, so sort of Adlerian power dynamics. And what you find on a macroeconomic Adlerian level, everyone's wanting to be the big monkey. And it's a tragic situation that's about to destroy our planet, frankly. And I think that this is, you know, this big monkey mentality is really toxic, and the people who are attracted to it have their own psychopathology, I've found, quite frankly. But I think that in reality, the people can come together and make a change. And I think this is why, if you look at what we're doing with CSETI, which is the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, I mean, for example, we're getting ready to go in March down to Marco Island in Florida to train a group of people to go into transdimensional states of consciousness, remote view deep space, contact extraterrestrial civilizations and vehicles and their occupants, and vector them or bring them into a site. And if you look at what we've been doing over the last 20 years, there's been this exponential increase in contact we've been having. And these are just, you know, housewives and everyday people and business people and doctors and lawyers and whoever who are learning to do this. And what I'm telling people is that we have to now take it upon ourselves, just like the Physicians for Social Responsibility went to the old Soviet Union to create a sort of citizens détente and break down the barriers of the Cold War. We have to do that as people to make contact with these civilizations, because Hillary Clinton's not doing it, the Secretary General's not doing it, and who is doing it? Well, we have military programs that aren't controlled by the president actually targeting and shooting at these extraterrestrial vehicles. And this is also an existential threat to our future. And when I first said this to the Secretary General and his wife of the United Nations, they were appalled. And I said, yeah, and I've got the images and proof that this is going on. So one of the problems is that we need to show a good side of humanity to these interstellar visitors who are here for completely peaceful reasons. Obviously, if they were hostile and they had the ability to travel faster than the speed of light, which they do, it would be point set match over about the time we detonated the first atomic weapon at Trinity site in 1945. But I think we're dealing with civilizations, however, that are quite enlightened but incredibly concerned about the human proclivity for combining very advanced sciences and technologies into weapon systems, and now we're going out into space with them. So the whole SDI thing. And this is why, you know, when we went to the moon, Neil Armstrong was overheard saying that we were basically warned off the moon, that these extraterrestrial civilizations did not want us going to other planets, even our moon, as a competing Soviet Union, U.S. Part of our military program, which is what NASA was. And everybody knows that that's what the moon race was. And I think that they really want us to go out into space as a peaceful, unified people, not in a militaristic way, because we then can go out. If we go out peacefully, we're going to be welcomed. If we go out militarily, we're not going to be welcomed because we're a threat to other planets out there. And I think this is what folks have to understand, is that the things that are going on this subject are very nuanced and in a sense complex, but there's a very simple theme here, and that is the entry ticket to space is peace, and not just world peace, universal peace. It's not enough to say we're going to not fight amongst ourselves, but we're going to blow, another civilization out of the sky in some sort of eschatological fantasy or Armageddon fantasy of the end of the world. I think that, we have to say, look, it's time for us to grow up, accept the fact we need to live together peacefully, and bring these sciences and technologies out for peaceful uses. Which will be many, not just medical, but energy generation, propulsion, transportation. I mean, the whole anti-gravity propulsion work that was done by T. Townsend Brown back when Tesla was working on things back in the 20s. This has scientifically been proven, but all those projects went deep black in 1954. And in fact, aerospace journals, my uncle pointed this out to me, had anti-gravity research in the open literature up until the early 50s, and then it went black. Well, where did it go? Well, it's in a vault, and it's being kept very secret. So, we don't need jet engines and rockets and internal combustion engines of cars. We already have the replacement. And so, this dysfunction in the power dynamic of the world, which is, it's really the tail wagging the dog here, where you have these very powerful transnational corporate and financial interests dictating what's happening, is a crime against humanity. And we just recently got a report from the very mainstream Association for American Sciences, Federation of American Scientists, and they have a government secrecy project, and they just did a report that there are 5,135 patents that have been kept secret, including in 1971 there was a photovoltaic solar generator to create electricity from the sun that was just 20% more efficient and more output than what was available, and they classified that because it would be too much of a competition with coal and oil. This is not our group reporting this. This is the American Federation of Scientists, very mainstream organization. So this kind of abuse of power has been going on, and what it's doing is that it's causing the Earth to become very sick, and we need to do something to lift that burden and heal the planet.
I mean, it goes right along with the example I like to use is, we had the oil shortage in the 80s, but there was already the beginnings of solar technology and solar cars and electrical-powered cars, and then that all disappeared. And I'm like, and then we have this oil thing going on now with the gas prices and everything, and I'm going, they had 30-plus years to develop that technology. Shame on us, and how greedy can we get?
Well, it is shame on all of us, because it's not just solar. I mean, solar is a very primitive way of doing this, and wind power.
And I'm just using that as an example.
But even something that was 20% more efficient in solar was suppressed through an illegal use of the National Security Act. And I personally am working with scientists who have built these so-called free energy devices that pull energy out of the fabric of space-time, that would give you free energy for your house and car, that have had the national security orders placed on those devices, had them seized and put into, quote-unquote, the vault. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is happening, and it is criminal, and it is not something that the President and the Congress are approving of, or the people. It's a specialized, compartmented group of folks who have arrogated to themselves and hijacked our democracy into an agenda to maintain the status quo of the world energy supply and financial system. And this is a very serious problem. In the meanwhile, you have this planet being visited, unmistakable, by extraterrestrial civilizations. We have over 4,000 documented cases where extraterrestrial vehicles have landed and left physical evidence. And the French government has started releasing many of these, and so has the British government. And we have all these. The disclosureproject.org has all this information, documents, physical evidence. And so the question about whether we're being visited has been answered. The answer is yes. The only question is, what do we do about it? What do the people do about it? And this is why we have formulated these three projects. One is we need to train people to become ambassadors and contact these extraterrestrial civilizations as citizen diplomats. And cseti.org, cseti.org is where people can find out about what those programs are. But disclosureproject.org is continuing to educate not just the public, but our policymakers and the president and his cabinet and folks like that. I put together a large briefing for him when he got elected, because you can't count on the fact that he can call in the CIA director and get an answer, because Leon Panetta, one of his good friends, asked me for a briefing because he couldn't find out anything. I mean, I hate to, it's terrible to say, but Washington is such a clusterfuck of messed up craziness that, sorry, you can bleep that out. But the problem is that it's so dysfunctional, and people have this sort of inflated fantasy idea that, gee, you're elected president of the United States, and you've got a magic wand and an all-access pass into these things. And it's funny because a friend of mine was at a dinner with Jimmy Carter not too long ago, where someone asked, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And President Carter said, well, I don't think I was that man. And this guy said, what do you mean? He says, well, there are things I couldn't find out about as president. And someone asked, do you mean UFOs? He says, yes, that and more, referring to all these energy and high-tech programs that are being kept secret. So I think that people have to understand that we, the people, need to organize around this and make this change happen, not just in terms of bringing out the energy systems. And we have a group, a not-for-profit entity we formed called the OrionProject.org, where we're trying to raise the funds for a grant. It's a $5.7 million grant proposal to put these top-secret scientists into a civilian facility that we would operate to bring these technologies out in the next 18 months or so. And we can do it. We need to find the sources of funding for it, because we have got to have our own facility and equipment to do this. And we've identified the scientists who can. In fact, one of the scientists I'm working with is one of the top 14 scientists in the Department of Defense. In fact, he's been called one of the national treasures in the scientific community. And he has worked on these energy systems and is ready to leave his job and work full-time with us to do this. So we've spent 20 years putting this team together. Now we need to actually light the fuse and go. And I think that the other thing is that the average person needs to realize that it's really not difficult to make contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations. They're eager to make peaceful contact with people who approach it in an open-minded, non-prejudiced, non-fearful way. And really there's nothing to be afraid of. Yes.
We're going to go to break in like 2 minutes, so
okay.
Let's come back to that topic, because I definitely want to spend some time exploring that. Let
Sure.
me ask this question, if you can give it an answer. So if the president's not running it, and the government and the heads of state are not running this stuff, who the heck is? Is it the government, kind of, or is it big business? I mean, who's
it's what I said.
in charge of all this?
Yeah, it's what Senator Inouye said. It's a government within the government. It's transnational now. It's not just U.S. It's in other countries. There are people on that committee, such as Admiral Bobby Ray Inman for years has been. George Shultz was. Dick Cheney is a member of this committee. And it was initially started as a committee to investigate this whole issue back in the Truman era, called Majestic, and that MAGI is still on documents I have from the 90, MAJI, Magi and Magic. And those we know exactly who these people are, frankly. I mean, I've met with a number of them. And what you find is that even amongst the people who are running these projects and have been keeping them secret, there's not unanimity at all about the continuation of the secrecy, which is why some of them have been cooperating with me, and frankly why I'm still breathing the free air of Earth, to put it bluntly. And I think that there's a lot of dissent within that group now, and part of it is what we've created by bringing out this information and having so many other governments around the world opening their files. It's not at all a monolith, and that's good news. The bad news is that the hardliners are very seriously hardliners, and they do like keeping these things under their control, and they're not going to go quietly into that dark night. But I think that it's something where we know, in fact, for the president, and if you go to disclosureproject.org, I wrote the 6 or 7 page summary of this, and then I attached to it a National Reconnaissance Office a document that actually gives the project code names and code numbers and locations. So that's all out there.
All right. We need to go to break. We're talking to Dr. Steven Greer. His webpage is disclosureproject.org, but there's a whole bunch more. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.